Guys, does either of you have a can opener? Then it doesn't let me keep one in the basement.
No, why don't you ask Danny? Wait, you eat peo starch?
Yeah?
Do you know what peo starch is made of?
Yes, it's written on the label. Only 100% free-range peos.
Also, do you know where Danny is?
He said he needed some time alone to prepare mentally for this video.
I discovered Warhammer 40,000 in 2019, when I was still a university student with a passion for history, wars, empires, dark stories where beauty can only be found in the indomitable human spirit fighting for a better future. 40k was beautiful. As an Italian with a passion for the ancient Roman Empire and its history, it was everything I've ever dreamed of. It was love at first sight. A love that pushed me to teach myself English, just so I could learn 40k from the source, and not from the translation and interpretation of somebody else. To form my own vision of it without relying on anybody else. The sense of wonder I felt while learning 40,000 for the first time was undescribable. A sense of wonder now lost to me after years studying this lore. A sense of wonder I can now only relive while explaining it to somebody else. Hoping they find it as interesting as I did. Hoping they love 40k as much as I do. And yet, my experience with it has been one of struggle and constant conflict. 40k was being invaded, subverted, and yet it seemed people were letting it happen undisturbed. I recognized the pattern, moved to give a voice to those like me that lacked one. It is why I founded Warhammer 40k Heresy Posting, tired of being banned on Facebook groups for arguing with other people about lore they wanted changed because offensive or too violent. It is why I was taking head-on very famous YouTubers like Templin Institute years before the Pontius even existed. My brain absorbing lore like a sponge to the point I had no fear to face him, because I knew he was wrong. And he knew as well when he backed out of the challenge he himself launched.
Why should the superhuman warrior that can reproduce by himself and that sees you as a weakling by norm ever defend you? Why shouldn't he enslave you? Why shouldn't he destroy you and make more like himself?
This YouTube channel was created only because I realized the extreme low quality of lore content that was being put out on YouTube. Wars that to me required 3 months of research and work to recount extensively and correctly, being dismissed as minor events and explained with wrong lore. Just as a minor example of how unreliable both wikis and self-proclaimed lore channels on this platform are. My frustration in seeing the people that claim to love 40k and to be very passionate about it, to the point of making videos on its universe, just bowing their heads to a mob of people that never cared of 40k, that wanted only to inject their own ideology in it, taint it with the real world, pollute it, was immeasurable. While I can respect opinions opposite to mine or even neutral on the general situation, I find people who don't stand for their passions or what they love to be weak. And if there is an Iron Warriors idea I share, is that
weakness is a choice.
These self-named lore masters didn't take a stance. So, like in the past, it came to me again. And here we are, picking an open conflict against an idea that has already started corrupting the universe I love the most. With even Games Workshop gaslighting people that their changes are not motivated just by real-world feelings, but at the same time, in reality, have nothing to do with 40k itself. But they all underestimated how dedicated the loyal fans of this universe are, and never considered that they decided to pick a fight with the fans of a universe where everything revolves around war. So, every day I wonder, what the hell did they think would happen?
Alright, I am filled with peo starch, I have my war helmet on, I am ready for the incoming shitstorm.
You mean for the topic of the video or for the comments?
A bit of both.
Alright, before we start, I just wanted to say thank you to all people on our Discord and the members of our Patreon that helped us with the research involved in this video. You find all links to join us in the description. Now, as you're watching this video, you have to keep a couple of things in mind for it. First of all, my position is renowned as being an extreme gatekeeper when it comes to the lore of 40k. I do not like nonsensical and unjustified retcons. I do not like real-world influences to bleed into 40k. And this video will prove that to the fullest of its extent. So, if you are here just to be offended by my opinions, be offended. Nobody cares. Welcome to the internet. In this video, we will demolish completely every single argument that can be made as to why and how female Space Marines should be included into the lore of 40k. And we will prove not only that they can't exist on a lore level, but that they will tear 40k apart if they did indeed exist. Brace yourselves, and let's get to the slaughter. And we will start, in fact, from the origin of the myth that female Space Marines ever existed in the 40k universe. And I will show you in full how little the people that this video is about know or have researched about 40k in general. One of the biggest myths of 40k that is used from the people that want female Marines is that they existed in the first edition of Rogue Trader published in 1987, which is a myth that has been used for years by this point, to push this narrative that Games Workshop should retcon 40k to put them back in, as it is believed they were there in first edition, but were retconned out.
And were they?
No.
Can you elaborate a little?
If I must. In September 1987, Games Workshop, at the time a small company based in the UK, released Rogue Trader, a tabletop wargame that would evolve just one edition later into becoming Warhammer 40,000. Now, while Rogue Trader is considered detached from 40k because of the extreme differences in lore and tone of the universe, it is officially regarded as Warhammer 40,000 First Edition. This First Edition, weaponized time and time again to try and get Games Workshop to retcon the Space Marines to include females in their ranks, is said to not mention the use of Gensid for the creation of Marines. And while that is technically accurate, it is not the end of the story. Not one bit. In fact, yes, the Rogue Trader First Edition rulebook doesn't have any specific mention of the Gensid, that will later be used to explain the genetical enhancement applied to a human to evolve him in a Marine. You can see so yourself at page 153 of the manual. And if you want to know more about what Marines are in detail in current lore, you can just check my video on it. But that manual was not the only place to have the lore of First Edition, was it? We started in September 1987. Let's move to a few months after. Let's go to February 1988. White Dwarf number 98 releases. And not only do both pages 13 and 16 mention Gensid directly while it is being discussed how Space Marines are created. Giulio, do me a favor. Read the last part at the end of the page out loud for us.
These considerations mean that only a small portion of people can become Space Marines. They must be male because zygotes are key to male hormones and tissue types. Hence the need for tissue compatibility tests and psychological screening. If these tests prove successful, a candidate becomes a neophyte. With the completion of organ implantation and attended chemical and hypnotic training, the subject becomes an initiate. An initiate receives training before joining the ranks as a full brother.
So, sorry to disrupt the dreams of glory of the people that don't bother to do research themselves when learning about 40k. Space Marines were from their first lore only and exclusively male. We are still talking first edition here. But now we have to move to the other two main reasons people mention first edition as having female Space Marines. And we start from the infamous Sunstroke chapter of Challenge Magazine 36, published in 1988. The Sunstroke chapter is infamous for mentioning something called the Little Sisters of Purification, writing on them, and I quote, "The Sisters are one of several female chapters of Imperial Space Marines." Now, many people point at this magazine almost like the smoking gun and final proof that female Space Marines did at one point exist. But again, let's look a little bit deeper into it. The Sunstroke chapter was published in Challenge Magazine, a magazine owned by GDW. Now, what is GDW? Is it Games Workshop and they changed name after? No. GDW was an American, remember Games Workshop is UK based, magazine that made fan-made lore to be an additional and official source for various war games. Hell, you can see it on the cover that they mention what fan-made lore they wrote and for what universe in this same number. This magazine never had authorization to release official lore for 40k. Anything you read here is just fan-made ideas written for fun, nothing more.
Imagine being Roger Hamlin and being responsible for one of the biggest fandom wars of the last 20 years, just because you wanted to write something cool.
And final debunk we have to present you for Warhammer 40,000 First Edition, we have these minis. See, these minis were released for First Edition, and they are used as the material proof that female Marines were canon in First Edition. But once again, what do you think is the truth?
Wild guess judging the lies exposed until now. It is false.
Congratulations, Pio, you are smarter than Lorgar.
I will tell you to stop insulting the Wordbearers fans that watch this channel, but there is no bigger insult in existence than the Primarch they chose for themselves.
See, not only were these minis labeled sisters, and we actually had people sending photos of their real minis, and they all had the same stylized denomination as sisters written on it, but we decided to dig even deeper into them. These models aren't once referred as Marines anywhere in any source we found on them, just as female warriors. But in the first edition codex at page 268 and 269, we found lore directly correlated with them. And there, lo and behold, hello Adepta Sororitas lore.
More than Valbes girl.
And do you want to know how I know that these two models are Adepta Sororitas and not Marines? Well, it is simple, and many keen-eyed people will have already noticed it. The emblem in the art, the Baphomet-style skull. It is the same that is painted on the painted minis that illustrate the release of that particular White Dwarf. And when was this White Dwarf released exactly? Because I asked myself that question for a long time, as it might have been important to understand the timeline of the release. And the timeline is this. Original Rogue Trader release, September 1987. White Dwarf number 98, the one that mentions Genseed and that Marines can only be male, February 1988. The one where the Sisters of Battle that people say are Marine released in, White Dwarf number 99, March 1988. A month after the confirmation that Marines can only be male. Now, I am no marketing genius, and in general I despise the direction Games Workshop has taken in the last half decade or so. But even I believe they aren't, or at least weren't, stupid enough to establish lore just to contradict it a month after in the next release of White Dwarf. I know they were dumb enough to employ CSGO as a writer, but I think even they have limits.
So you are saying that people spread lies all this time? On the internet? That is unheard of.
But because I know what kind of people I'm dealing with, I wanted a final nail in the coffin on the argument of the existence of female Space Marines in first edition. And I found it in the most unexpected of sources. A person on our Discord server actually found and contacted Alan Merritt. For who doesn't know who Alan Merritt is, he worked at Games Workshop from 1980 to 2016. He has at least spent 36 years in the company, focusing on design and product management of miniatures, books, games, and magazines. And he was a member of the senior management team, in fact working as the head of intellectual property of Games Workshop before retiring. Alan was asked two simple questions. The first one, obviously, was if female Marines ever existed at all. And the second question we asked was how did the Sisters come into existence as a faction? Giulio, do the honors.
Hi Matt. Sorry it's taking me time to reply, in middle of a big house move of late. First question, is the answer. Definitely not canon, as in nothing to do with the official work by Games Workshop and the design studio. 40k and Warhammer articles in other people's magazines were studiously ignored by management and more often than not irritated the designers themselves. That is, if they were even aware of them, which was probably most likely. As the years unfolded, it turned out that 40k was wildly more popular than we could have ever possibly imagined, and hugely successful commercially. The company and the designers of miniatures and writers were constantly looking for more things to do. There was a picture of a warrior nun in the original Rogue Trader book, and it was this single image that was the inspiration for the Sisters of Battle. These were never intended as a replacement for female Astartes. The canonical position was that such entities did not exist in the 40k universe. The Sisters were grasped as an opportunity to give structure to the Ministorum and to release some cool warrior nun models. Just designed some knockout minis for the Sisters, and Brian Nelson did some particularly fine priests and the like, but the army wasn't the most popular one we released. As always, Games Workshop got loads of flack about the rules for the army and specifically the saving throw for the basic sister. These were often cited for why the army was so relatively unpopular. Draw your own conclusions. I suspect it remains a third or a best second rank army in terms of sales and collecting, despite the rather marvelous new models the company has recently published. All the best, Alan.
I went above and beyond to show people how big the lies of the individuals that push female Marines were. Don't you dare go in the comments and try to tell me they are canon again. This, however, was just the first of the arguments malicious people use to try and push retcons made for political reasons into 40k. There is numerous others, and now we are going to dismantle them all one after the other. Rip and tear until it's done. The first of the arguments people try and use to justify female Marines into 40k are, unfortunately, the missing Primarchs. Now, we covered the destiny of the missing Primarchs in our very first lore video, covering the Rangdan Xenocides in their entirety and offering a theory to the destiny of both Primarchs in that same video, with circumstantial proof by the Xenocides themselves. But theories aside, we have had numerous times confirmation that the missing Primarchs were indeed male, by people that remember them in 40k. Removing that, as a general citation, we have that every single time they are mentioned in 40k by other Primarchs, they are always mentioned as the missing brothers, and always regarded with male pronouns in discussions. We have the testimony of Malkador the Sigillite, the closest advisor and best friend of the Emperor of Mankind, in the book Scars by Wraight, and to be extremely specific in episode 2, about the fact that he had proposed to the Emperor to make some of the Primarchs female, but that simply the Emperor laughed it off, almost as if he was joking.
"And the lion," said Malkador. "What of him?" "He pursues his private feuds," said Thorn. "And when has he ever been anything but his own master?" Malkador smiled. "You brothers, such a nest of rivalries. I warned him to make you sisters, that it would make things more civilized. He thought I was joking. I wasn't." Thorn didn't smile. His face seemed permanently rooted in a kind of frozen tension.
This is obviously very much in character for the Emperor of Mankind. By popular theory of anyone that knows about the Thunder Warriors and their fate, it is clear that the Emperor never was fond of creating female superhumans. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we covered the Thunder Warriors in our video about what being a Space Marine truly means. The Emperor never made transhuman females of any kind. No Thunder Warriors, no Astartes, and no Custodians. We made a video about this too, don't worry. Because to put it simply, in his opinion, the Imperium of Men is not the domain of transhuman beings. It is the domain of pure humans, and not for the post-humans. And we get direct insight into this in the book First Lord of the Imperium by L.J. Golding, where Malkador confirms pretty much that the Marines weren't destined to exist indefinitely, but like the Thunder Warriors would have been eliminated once their usefulness expired.
Would it comfort you if I were to say the Primarchs, all of them, are but a means to an end?
I do not understand. Forgive me.
The Imperium is not for the post-humans, but for mankind. You know this. You helped me to manage them, to direct their efforts. The legions and their sires are conquerors' tools, and nothing more.
You mean the Thunder Warriors?
Like them, burning brightly but briefly. But the Emperor and I could not conduct the Great Crusade with gen-enhanced mortals. We needed something greater, something stronger to reclaim the stars. And in order to control it, we needed a lifespan for the Legiones Astartes that had nothing to do with aging or timed infirmity. Believe me when I say it, Sybil Neaster, this was always intended to be the final act of the crusade. We wanted the Primarchs to turn against one another, against their father. Be assured, we maneuvered each of them from the moment of their rediscovery, pitting them against one another, stoking their brotherly rivalries with his unequal favor. It was not difficult, no more so than positioning pieces on a Cheops board. Those who could not be managed well, they would never reach the end game. Oh, do not weep, my dear. You fear that the Emperor cannot control his sons, and yet I tell you that this war is the method of that control. The Primarchs have no more free will than we gave them.
Can it be true?
My failure was in underestimating the true enemy. The ruinous powers have emboldened their champions among the 18, and the war began before we were ready. And so, every toll of that bell gives me pause to question. Was this death one we intended, or yet another innocent soul I might have saved? That is my burden to bear, and I do so that the Emperor may concentrate on the final battle to come.
Will he win?
The future is not my area of expertise.
Now, it is theorized that Malcador lied in a few parts, especially when he talks about how the Heresy was always in program to exterminate the Marines once their duty was done. But in my opinion, he's saying the truth up until that part. Thing proven by the fact that the first mention ever made of a female transhuman is a proved retcon written so badly that I annihilated it in the video of the importance of lore. Adding to that the fact that Marines started mutating uncontrollably after a certain point in the Imperium's history, and you notice that the Emperor lacked care for his own super soldiers. If you want a weapon that relies on the purity of genetics, and you want it to last as long as possible, you try to perfect it as much as possible. The Marines before the Primaris were a genetical mess on most cases, proving that the Emperor wanted to use them, and that he didn't make them to be a permanent addition to humanity. If you don't want a species to reproduce, it is simple, never give them women to do so with, or even try to do so with.
This foreshadows something we will talk about later in the video. Something that ends in Q-Laba.
After that, we have two arguments that can be disbanded together. The argument that humanity in 40k has been at war so long that the physical and biological differences of males and females have pretty much disappeared, and by that logic making them Marines wouldn't result in Marines that are inferior to their male counterpart, and the argument some people have brought up citing that some female Marines can exist if intersex individuals are used to make them. First of all, that is not at all how evolutionary biology works, because trust me, as a person with degrees in chemistry and biological chemistry, evolution takes a very fucking long time. Even if we go by the largest of estimates and we take the beginning of the Age of Strife as the starting point of the Dark Ages of humanity, there is no way in hell that in just 15,000 years, Imperial women went from female biology and constitution to being pretty much identical to males. It is simply not how it works. Now, some arguments can be made about general changes that happened in specific cases of 40k. Look at the Ogryns, even if we never even saw in an artwork a female Ogryn until now. Or maybe even the Catachans, where their women are described as being as capable as the males because of the level of danger the planet they are born on poses. But easily as capable doesn't mean that they are identical to the men, just that they can fight and survive on the planet and on battlefields as well as them. The most recent and direct citation to what is required to make someone a Space Marine comes from the Horus Heresy 2.0 manual, and if you read in detail what it says,
the process by which Space Marines are created relies inherently on the hormonal and biological makeup of the human male, meaning that only males can be subjected to the transformation. In practice, only a small percentage of potential candidates will for one reason or another be regarded as suitable, because of genetic, environmental, or psychological factors.
Meaning that not only you need women to have the same hormone levels of males to be capable of being transformed, thing that is not happening in the short time span, trust me on that, but that also you need women to have the same biological makeup of the males. You pretty much need women to be male to make them into Space Marines. You see why that doesn't work, right? And there is also the argument of intersex people being risen. Now, this is stupid on a whole new level. The Imperium considers mutants people with less genetical mutations than intersex people. But even if we entertain it, we learn from various books, and even from my favorite one in general, Dante by Guy Haley, that the children that take part in the trials to become Marines are first of all checked for genetical compatibility with the gene seed, which means that mutations have either to be completely absent or extremely trivial to make them even have a shot at becoming Marines. If you take someone that is intersex, their chromosomes are already so out of place to disqualify them from the get-go from the entire process. They will not even be allowed to take part in the trials. And counting on everything I said until now, do you even realize how dangerous and deadly Space Marine trials and training are? This book covers Dante's childhood. We see him take part in the trials, and we see him go through them all the way to becoming a Space Marine captain in the Blood Angels. In the book, at the time of the trials, more than 500 children showed up and were deemed genetically compatible with the gene seed of Sanguinius, and allowed to take part in the trials. Of those over 500 children, only 57 reached the final trial alive. And of those 57, it is estimated that less than 10 survive all the way to becoming full Space Marines. One of them was Dante himself. Space Marines want only the best of the best, and we see in real life how many physical and biological differences there are between men and women. even between children of the correct age to become Space Marines, which is late childhood or teenage. To put it simply, only the best of the male children are even destined to survive the trials, which, I'm sorry to say, disqualifies females entirely. You can see it in the real world, which at this point I am including because people pull it in my hobby to try and retcon it, that for example there is no woman in the special forces of the Navy SEALs. And to be specific, there is no woman in combat roles inside the Navy SEALs. The physical requirements and testing being so strict and high level that no woman until now has managed to qualify for it. So, I'm sorry to say it, but no. Neither of these theories can work with the lore or world building of 40k itself.
Just to clarify, we are just stating the truth. This is not a personal opinion in any way.
And unfortunately now, we have a group of arguments that we can resolve all together, but will force us to talk about something we really didn't want to talk about. Those arguments are the following. Number 1. The Space Marine conversion process already has a low success rate, so why not cast the net as wide as possible and attempt to convert girls as well? Number 2. Because with augmentations, women can be just as strong as males. Number 3. Female Marines will mean more soldiers on the battlefield. Let's start with the first, including girls into the process to make Marines so that we cast a wider net and have more successes that become Astartes. Obviously we will ignore the fact that I already debunked this in the last segment and approach it from a different perspective. Now, again, if you have watched my video on what is a Space Marine, you know how much of a living hell Marines go through, and how many children don't make it while Marines are attempting to replenish their numbers. So, I just want to point out that this is pushing to have girls go through the same hell that boys already go through. But at the same time, it is probably one of the stupidest arguments ever made for 40k. First of all, humanity is an empire tempered in the fires of endless war. They are very familiar with attrition numbers and population growth. They know they can spare males, and are aware that in very rare cases they can spare females. Keep in mind that I'm approaching this purely by a logical perspective, no feelings involved. Using females, and females so young at that, as Marines usually recruit once every generation, will mean pretty much opening the doors to entire generations of young girls to attempt the trials, and dying in the process. This means that in the best case scenario, the planets these girls are taken from will slowly go into stagnation on a growth level, stopping from growing and providing both less recruits and less human soldiers. Or worse, they would actually go in the negative. Less women around means less babies born, and if the population starts dying out faster than you can replenish it, your planet is going to face a demographical collapse in a few centuries. This also explains why female Imperial Guard soldiers are so very rare in 40k. Because removing a few planets where military service is pushed on both men and women, the majority of the Imperium's warriors actually draft only males to form their own Imperial Guard regiments to send out. They know full well that only as a last resort, or in case of an extreme level of female overpopulation on your planet, is wise to form female regiments. Obviously, this doesn't bar women from joining the armies. I'm talking purely on a drafting basis, mass forced recruitment. The Space Marines themselves simply will not allow it. They want the populations of the planet they recruit on to grow, so that they can have more recruits if and when more are needed for their own chapter. But keep in mind that Marines are restricted to their own recruiting grounds. But at the same time, the Imperium of Men spans more than 1 million worlds. The Imperium could be well into the trillions if not quadrillions of human citizens. Marines are limited by two things, the Codex Astartes and their own gene seed. The Codex Astartes leaves Marines confined to a maximum number of battle brothers at any given time, unless there is special exceptions, or 1000 maximum. This means that the male children of a world are more than enough to maintain that number. Hell, in Rynn's world, the Crimson Fist chapter that recruits from the world of Rynn and the Loki sector is pretty much full strength at the beginning of the book, meaning that so little of a territory was actually enough to provide the Crimson Fist with almost the maximum number of Marines allowed. They simply have no reason to include females, because their limitation is not aspirants or recruits. Their true limitation is gene seed. Now, once again, we go into more detail about this in the video What is a Space Marine. For real, watch that video for the details. But gene seed is pretty much what dictates the amounts of Space Marines a chapter can truly have. Every Space Marine can produce in his own body 2 progenoid glands, which are the so-called gene seed, meaning that every Space Marine created can allow 2 more to exist just from these glands. But at the same time, millennia after millennia, the gene seed has degraded. Many chapters suffer so many mutations and rejections in their own aspirants that lead to a failed implantation that their number can't even approach the maximum the Codex Astartes allows. I mentioned it in that video, but before the Primaris, the Flesh Terror's gene seed was so degraded they could have a maximum of 300 to 400 Space Marines at any given time. And the problem wasn't certainly recruits, it was gene seed. The gene seed is a very precious and finite resource for all chapters that exist in 40k. It is what makes the existence of Marines possible in the first place, and it is the only way to create more. It is often destroyed in battle or lost to various circumstances or degradation, and also a part of it has to be paid to Mars for mutation screenings and to be put to the side to form more Marine chapters if needed. This means that only a part of the gene seed harvested from Marines stays with them. So, the only way to create Marines is gene seed, which is a very precious and finite resource, that with a failed implantation is most often than not lost and goes to waste. It is also a resource which is decaying on a genetical level. It is commonly lost during battles and wars, making it even more precious than it is in peace times, and the Imperial Space Marines should waste it on incompatible candidates. Exactly why? The Imperium is certainly not lacking in recruits. With what level of backwards thinking would they waste such a precious resource on something they know will not work? Hell, it doesn't even work commonly on male aspirants. The word is that only 1 on 100,000 aspirants ever becomes a full Space Marine. Why would they even try it? And this connects to the final argument. Augmenting females once they are Space Marines to make them as strong and effective as males. Again, why? You aren't lacking in recruits to put through the meat grinder, and with how many die in the process, you need more boys to be born on the world for the next generation to try again. Why waste gene seed on something that not only won't work in general, but even if it did, it made an inferior and higher maintenance marine that you need to augment even further just to reach the basic level a male aspirant would have provided anyway? What logic there is in that? Because again, we are dealing with it on a logical level. I don't care if this logic offends you, it is still the truth. Even if they weren't bound to the traditions of the Emperor, the legions in their own chapters had Marines that were always and only male. Why would they even attempt something so stupid and wasteful in the first place? And this brings me to the final argument made in favor of female Space Marines on the side of the Imperium. This argument can exist only if you disregard everything I said, and female Marines could exist in the first place. The fact that there would be more Marines fighting on the battlefields of 40k. This is not a good thing how you believe it is, and it is because of the experiments of a single monster that created one of the most foul creatures ever seen in 40k.
Please don't say it.
And I'm talking of Warsmith Onsu and his creations, the Demonculabas. I know how much of an infamous legend, and at the same time meme, the Demonculaba is by this point. But if you explore it in detail, you will notice how vile of a chaos brutality it truly is. It also makes for a funny laugh if you use it to give nightmares to someone, or if like me you recommend it to your personal PO.
And I thought the Geneva Convention was good inspiration.
The Demonculaba is a creature talked about in the third novel of the Ultramarine series by Graham McNeill, in the book named Dead Sky, Black Sun. Now, I do realize this is a delicate topic, but let's rip the band-aid off fast and painlessly. This is one of the most brutal fates you can ever get as a living being in 40k. I will give a trigger warning here for this part, but if you are a 40k fan, you need to be prepared to not be squeamish in the face of extreme suffering. So, keep watching, and welcome to 40k. The Demonculabas, that I cannot show on screen because they are simply too brutal to be shown, do your research if you want, were an effort by the Iron Warriors, and to be specific Warsmith Onsu, to have an alternative process of Space Marine creation that could use even corrupted gene seed and the remains of dead Space Marines. Started using the gene seed stolen to the Imperial Fist during the War of Hydra Cordatus. The process was composed by multiple steps, but the principal ones were that they needed human males in their teen years. If kidnapped or enslaved, it was not important, but especially adult men and women. The men would be force-fed until they became bloated amalgamations of humans at the limit of bursting with how big they became, before being flayed of their skins and what was left behind discarded. Instead, for the woman, well, things were considerably worse. The kidnapped women were rendered inoffensive, their arms and legs amputated, their vocal cords cut. They were attached to tubes for nutrients and drugs as they were made bloated as much as possible, and then their bellies expanded to their limit and connected to tubes containing genetic material of loyalist and corrupted Marines. Their bodies crushed into a mush and added to pure gene seed to be fed into the Daemonculaba's bellies. The process was simple. The belly of the Daemonculaba was to be cut, the teen boy pushed into it, and the stomach would be stitched back together with him inside. And then it would be filled with the genetic material harvested from space marines to start mutating the human inside. This until the boy evolved into a marine inside of it, bursting out of the belly without skin and disfigured very often. If they pass the exam of the dark mechanicum around them, the skin harvested from the bloated males will be used to be wrapped around them and give them skin of their own, and they will be ready to join the ranks of the Iron Warriors. If they were deemed failures, they will be flushed out of the fortress to become unfleshed, abominations roaming Madrangard, the current homeworld of the Iron Warriors. And because I do not want to undermine how much of an horrific moment this was for the Ultramarines that witnessed it, I'll let Giulio do the honors as usual.
As they reached the top of the ramp, Uriel saw that the cages were indeed filled with hideous victims that resembled those poor unfortunates who had died in the flash camp in the mountains. But as horrific as that had been, this was a horror beyond anything yet seen before. Each vast, bloated creature in these cages was female, their bodies swollen beyond all resemblance to humanity. Shackled into their cages, they gurgled and drooled in voiceless madness and torment, their vocal cords having long since been cut. Engorged as they were by unnatural means, Uriel saw that their size was not simply due to monstrous infusions of growth hormones and dark magics. These gargantuan females were pregnant. No normal pregnancies though, saw Uriel. Their swollen bellies rippled with numerous tumescent growths, giants, squirming things easily the size of a space marine. With repulsed horror, Uriel realized that he looked on the Daemonculaba, vile, terrible, demonic wombs from which were ripped newly created Chaos Space Marines. Each cage was filled with these horribly pregnant monsters, and Uriel wept at their terrible fate. Here was the ultimate goal of his death oath, the destruction of which would see him restored in the grace of his chapter. He struggled harder in the grip of the savage mortician as he began cutting his armor from his body with a brutally efficient mix of blades and plasma cutters. This was no delicate surgery, and he screamed as his flesh was cut, pierced, and burned black by the procedure. Shards of his armor clanked to the floor, and he wept for the violation done to its spirit. First, his breastplate was split apart, his gold jay torn off, and his shoulder guards broken in two before being ripped asunder. The irritated beast slammed a heavy fist against Uriel's head, and blood streamed down his forehead. Bright flashes of pain bursting before his eyes. The robed creature carried him further around the tier of battery cages, blood dripping into his eyes as he was turned around to find himself looking through the mesh floor. Below him, he saw a great rumbling machine with a blood smear conveyor laden, with bullet-riddled bodies or corpses with limbs missing. Great rollers and crushers awaited the bodies of the fallen Iron Warriors, and each was ground to a thick paste within the machine before being carried along pulsing pipes to the cages of the Daemonculaba. Together, with the gene seed Hons were taken from Hydra Cordatus, Uriel saw that this must be how the traitors managed to reharvest their gene seed for rebirth. This blasphemy against such a sacred and precious symbol of the Space Marines was almost too much to bear, and he swore he would kill Honsu with his bare hands. At last, he was turned upright once more, seeing a number of other black-robed morticians working on convulsing the Daemonculaba. These sorry specimens had their bellies cut open and spread wide, pale pink folds of fatty flesh held open with clamps as the deformed mutants placed the panicked bodies of adolescent children within the open wombs, where the genetic material fed to the Daemonculaba would pass to the implanted children within. The children screamed at the monsters, begging for their lives or their mothers, but the black-robed monsters paid them no heed and continued their macabre procedures. Uriel twisted in his captor's grip, fighting desperately as he saw the open belly of a Daemonculaba before him. Another of the savage morticians assisted its fellow surgeon with the ovariotomy procedure, and Uriel bellowed in anger as he felt a blunt needle punch through the ossified bone shield that protected the organs within his chest cavity. His struggles grew weaker, as the powerful soporific sped around his body and overcame his fearsomely resistant metabolism. He felt rough hands laying him within the soft, wet embrace of the Daemonculaba's womb, and warmth enfolded him as he felt his limbs searched into its bloody interior. He felt pulsing organs around him, and the rapid tattoo of a heart beating too fast above his head.
You die now,
said the savage mortician.
Too old to become Iron Warrior. Gene seed will foster new growths to rupture your flesh. Mutant growths and unknown results ensue. You will be in pieces soon. In jars. No.
slurred Uriel, struggling feebly against the incapacitating drug.
Kill you.
But the swathes of the Demonculab's blubbery flesh were already being folded over his supine body to leave him trapped in darkness. Moist, blood-rich flesh smothered his face and he fought to free his hands, but a warm numbness suffused his body. The last thing Uriel heard before he slipped into unconsciousness was the sound of the demon womb's thick, leathery skin being stitched shut above him.
This is unsettling levels of brutal, and the writer wrote other questionable stuff throughout the years, but nonetheless, while Uriel Ventris will manage to destroy the Demonculabas and all the efforts of Onsu, this is something that happened, and this is something in which the Iron Warriors were successful in. The Demonculabas worked. Uriel Ventris and the Ultramarines are aware of the Demonculabas, and by straight connection, also Robute Gilliman is aware of it. You want to create female Space Marines and send them on the battlefields? How long until they are taken alive by Chaos, and the Demonculabas become a standard thing to produce Chaos Marines? Do you even realize how dangerous this is as a concept? The creation and deployment of Space Marine females will mean not only a wasteful endeavor for inferior and higher maintenance forces, but it will give Chaos Space Marines their greatest weapons, a way of reproducing out of control and without needing humans or each other truly to survive. You know who fears something like this would happen? The Emperor of Mankind. It was his reasoning that Marines must always maintain a connection to humanity. They are born from humans, and they are to protect humans. Humans are the only way Marines can ever exist and keep existing in the galaxy, because if they became self-sufficient and found a way to surclass mankind, at best they will become tyrants in this galaxy and become the owners of it. At worst, they will see humans as lesser and useless, and start either massive campaigns of conquer or extermination.
I have seen arts of the Demonculabas. I suggest against looking it up.
Now that we have dealt with all the arguments made on the Imperium side, we have to move to the opposite side now. We will now talk of Chaos. Obviously, we have the usual stupid arguments like, Chaos should do it because it will make them actually superior. We did something your corpse Emperor couldn't do. Or something that maybe the Emperor wasn't dumb enough to do, if we look at it from the correct perspective. Very few arguments made on the Chaos side are actually something to pay attention to. Everything and everyone on Chaos side are monsters working to inflict suffering and brutality on others. Chaos is Chaos, it is evil, and it will always be evil. But two of those arguments deserve more discussion and debunking of their own. The first one is Larana Autorian, which is not a female Space Marine. Larana Autorian is a captured Imperial Guard captain that was enslaved by the Iron Warriors. In Storm of Iron, she was forced to clean the armor of an Iron Warrior named Kroger, while he was not wearing it. But that armor was possessed by a demon, and this demon tempted Larana to wear the armor, and when she did, she was metamorphed into an avatar of the Art of Blood. She's a human woman empowered by a demon and chaos powers, not a female marine, which makes her fine in my books as a totally legit and lore-compliant character. Unironically, I have no problems with her of any kind. And the last argument instead is Fabius Bile and his Homo Novus, or New Men, project. The New Men are a creation and experiment of Fabius Bile into producing superhumans of his own. It is mentioned in the War of the Spider books that Bile saw Space Marines just as a useful tool, but that materially Space Marines are a disappointing genetical dead end. He wanted something more, something to actually replace and elevate humanity at large into something superior and loyal only to him. These new men are stronger, faster, and more intelligent than normal humans, engineered by Bile to be fearless warriors, and capable to defend themselves and fighting in this galaxy. There is also a variant called Glandowns, which are partially implanted with Space Marine gene seed, but they are designed to actually hunt Space Marines, and retrieve their gene seed to bring it back to Bile for unknown reasons. But with Bile, those reasons are usually vile experiments. The new men, though, are still inferior to Space Marines. Both normal and Glandowns variants are made to replace humanity itself. They aren't weapons, and aren't specialized to be weapons, just to be a superior standardized human capable of reproducing. It is mentioned in the Fabius Bile books that they aren't strong enough to take down Marines by themselves, but in fact they must hunt in packs to take down even one, and rely on ambushes and surprise attacks on isolated targets to even have a shot to bring down a Space Marine. They are just an upgraded form of humans created by the vile experiments of Fabius Bile. Unfortunately for them, still far from rivaling Space Marines, or even being comparable to them in any capacity. And if you ignore the fact they are implied to have Xenos DNA in them, if you want female superhumans, this is the closest you will ever get. Because you're not getting female Marines without contradicting everything I said until now.
I am all for dummy mummies, but these ones sound more like gene stealers than people.
And now, we come to the final step of this video, disbanding anything else that people might even think of using as an argument to try and justify female Space Marines. And because I'm tired of being hit with my feelings as an argument, unfortunately for the people I will talk about in this section, I am shaming publicly, and I am making names. These people will use anything they can to try and manipulate you into feeling bad for wanting 40k to stay true to itself and uncontaminated by external politics of the real world. And these people will usually bring up the Warhammer is for Everyone post made by Games Workshop in July 2020. This post got them so much backlash that they ended up backtracking it a couple of quarters later in an investor's report. And it is a post made at the height of the 2020 riots for the death of George Floyd. This post makes me sick to my stomach, as it is nothing but corporate pandering by a soulless corporation. A post that inherently points at gatekeeping with its phrasing. If you feel the same way as us, the soulless corporation, wherever and whoever you are, we are glad you are part of the Warhammer community. If not, you will not be missed. This post was the first rift that started a war in the fandom, because the side of the woke took it as a confirmation that Games Workshop was on their side and ready to kick out whoever didn't obey their own ideals. And the gatekeepers took it as a sign that the woke movement was going to invade 40k. And it did! Fucking female custodians! Other than that, I invite you to read the description of this Twitter post. Made out of spite, and with no love for the hobby. It is something this person is pushing only to make the opposite side more and more angry. It is something pushed out of spite for people they don't like. And it is not even the only argument that is pushed for that reason. There is people unironically advocating that hating in any way on the idea of female marines is something sexist to do. Just because you don't want 30 plus years of lore gutted just because activists that have no love for 40k want to feel better with themselves, by making everything as generic and a grey slop as they can. And once again, appeal to emotion. You have to agree with us, or you are sexist. What about you shut up and let me enjoy my hobby without political crap shoved into it? Don't you dare saying that 40k is political or everything is political. It is not how it works. There is even people on their side, dumber than the average political activist, that actively believe that Astartes are a blank canvas faction, which can be changed to represent anything you want. And it is the faction that makes the most sense to a woman in, and that adding woman to Astartes doesn't undermine any other faction, and adds options to an army. Yeah, fuck book readers, right? That are told from 1988 that Marines can only be male. Because who needs consistency, good writing and good stories written by actual good writers to enjoy any type of entertainment? That is a question I'm sure Veilguard and the Acolyte didn't fucking bother to ask. And the same person also fucking dared to say that 40k can handle letting more women exist. Oh yeah? It can also handle more men existing, doesn't it, Bits? Are you okay with having Brothers of Battle and Brothers of Silence for the only two fully female factions in the setting? If your answer is no, then shut up. Your biased opinion for a muscle mommy fetish has no place in the game.
Midsummer was always a joke.
There are people that unironically believe that having female Space Marines would attract more women into 40k and to join the hobby. In what reality do these people live in? Removing that the vast majority of female players I have seen and met play either orcs or tyrannids, they couldn't give less of a fuck about human factions. Do you guys even realize what we are talking about? It is a tabletop wargame for nerds, based on an ultra-violent universe made to be an over-the-top take on the brutality of the galaxy and the indomitable human spirit of fighting and struggling in the face of incoming doom. Not really something that can even begin to cater to women as a demographic in general. This isn't fucking Twilight or Hunger Games. Female players will always be a minority, and the majority of them are also extremely base people from what I've seen, that are openly against this kind of retcon pushed by people that do not care about the game at all. Because think about what we have seen until now. Do you see even an hint of love towards the hobby or the lore? Because all I see is either personal desire, politics, or pushing it out of spite for the side you don't like. I can't be the only one to notice this. I feel like I'm going crazy here. Am I going crazy, Chaplain Helmet?
Dutch grass.
Shut up, Chaplain Helmet! Nobody cares about your opinion. We even have giant YouTubers that at one point covered 40k say they don't care about the lore, and have turned against the community, and are now openly go and mock the people that care about their own hobby, and even came to the defense of Templin Institute when he showed his true face, by betraying the lore when he himself is a fucking low-level lore channel. There are people that believe that 40k players don't buy anything having women in it because they are misogynistic, and that Games Workshop keeps Space Marines male for some sense of toxic masculinity, when simply Space Marines are inspired by the Templar Orders Warriors of the real Crusades, and are pretty much space warrior monks. Also, there is no such thing as toxic masculinity. There is masculinity and being an asshole. Two different things. Fuck your lore! Its only use in a storytelling capacity is to fill out a wiki. Notice, once again, pushed out of spite, not for love of the hobby itself. Or the usual argument that 40k is a made-up universe and can be changed on a whim, because it is not reality but the fantasy of somebody else. This I won't even comment on. Go and watch my video on the importance of lore to dismantle this argument. Some of these people have the gall to say that it wasn't made for me, when I was the one to enter this hobby and look around in wonder, and ready to learn instead of changing it because it offended my fragile narcissistic feelings. Or that nobody will care about the retcon, in spite of the fact they are the first ones fixated on it, and that are pushing it with the cry of bigot to make it happen. Yes, there have been retcons in the past, but they were always retcons that went to the benefit of the story or to straighten parts that didn't make any sense. Like Chief Librarian Astropath Ilian Nastase of the Ultramarines. He was pretty much an Elf-Elder used by the Ultramarines and was pretty much a Space Marine of their ranks. Which doesn't make any fucking sense, because he's an Elf-Xeno abomination. So he was retconned out, because the Imperium will never allow something like that. All retcons until the Primaris were made with a story and a world building in mind to respect. Yes, they were more or less greedy at times to push minis, but still they were made to make the universe better and expand it. You want to know why the Female Custodians retcon was pretty much universally hated by true 40k fans? Because it is a retcon made for political reasons, to appease activists. Not to make something good or even decent into 40k. I dismantled the introduction story of Tauravala Cash as lore uncompliant in 5 minutes, when I'm sure it took them months to write it. Yes, but also, you can't fucking teleport through void shields! Because it is not a change made to make the universe better, but just to appease the people that screech about bigots all the time. Oh hey Kia, glad to see you don't understand the lore as usual. Sorry, but Kia makes me laugh more than the rest because she's in part fixated with fighting gatekeepers. She has fake accounts and spies in Heresy posting by her own admission, and even joined the Heresy posting Discord at one point just to leave a minute later. She probably understood she would have been clowned upon day and night in there. But I saw it. A coward as the rest of your ilk. The Primaris are shitty lore, there is no going around it. They are. I discussed why and gave a better alternative to the canon lore in my video The Primaris Mistake. Belisarius Cole is a shitty plot device pushed by Games Workshop to renew the Space Marine range, and forcing people to have to buy their models again just to be usable in tournaments and games. Nothing more. It is an addition made out of greed. Belisarius Cole is nothing but a shitty plot device for a story with no direction. They made the minis and the retcon without thinking of the wider implications, and then spent 4 years fixing the lore book after book, and even now it is barely holding itself together as is. And the evergreen opinion that there is not enough women in 40k. Tecnicamente dovrei comportarmi incazzato per il copione, ma mi sto incazzando per davvero adesso. Listen up here, people. None of us, not one of us, is against women or female characters inside the stories or the hobby. We just ask that they are lore compliant and well written. Hell, I myself find some of the female characters of the hobby some of the most badass characters in general. Lotara Sarrin, Coriel Zet, Tarasha Euten, Morven Val. I will pay to have more books about the Sisters of Battle, or Silence, or general female characters in 40k like Rogue Traders, or Guard Soldiers, or Officers, or even Hive Gangers. If the argument of the opposite side was we want more attention to be given to female factions and female characters in the hobby, I would have been on their side. No joke. It is my opinion too that they are underused parts of 40k that can be used to tell incredible stories. But retconning existing and beloved factions just to replace the lack of attention with a spotlight at the cost of the integrity of the universe is not a solution. If anything, it will make people take those characters not seriously. They will be the equivalent of 40k's DEI hires. There to prove a point, not to be well written, or to do anything meaningful in the story of 40k. This wouldn't be as big of a problem as it is if some of the writers hadn't actively engaged to say that there is no fucking canon in 40k, like Gav Thorpe, that said, and I quote, "With Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000, the notion of canon is a fallacy. Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 exist as tens of thousands of overlapping realities in the imaginations of games developers, writers, readers, and gamers. None of those interpretations is wrong." First of all, glad to hear that, Gav, because your books generally suck, and I will make them not canon in a second if I had the power. But this raises in me a very simple question. Why the fuck should I buy Games Workshop books then? What the fuck are Black Library books about 40k then? Overglorified fan fiction? You either have a universe with canon and rules that you can write for, or you have no fucking universe to write for.
What do I pay you for? What do I pay you for? You're literally less than useless! My paraplegic grandma could do more than you, god damn it!
And with all of this, there is the final and most irritating question that I'm sure the comments are already filled with. Because my life has been filled with it from when I opened Heresy posting to create a movement of gatekeeping. Why do you care so much? You really want to know? Alright. But remember that you asked for it. Picture this. It is 2019. I myself am 19. I am just a kid that has entered university. I do not come from the best situations in life, but now I find myself in a city that I don't know, surrounded by people that are strangers, alone, with nobody to rely on or keep me company. With my studies the only thing I dedicated time to. With various things that happened to me at the time, I fell deep into the pit that is depression. My saving grace? Funnily enough, a video review of the Ultimate Apocalypse mod for Dawn of War Soulstorm. Which little tangent, Winter Assault is better, and anybody that doesn't think that has bad taste. While I was watching it, I recognized the armors, the weapons, I had seen them somewhere. Then I remembered, a short movie I found on YouTube called Astartes. Only part 1 and 2 out of the time, but it seemed so cool. I couldn't understand a word because I didn't speak English at the time, but it seemed in a way made for me. I always do a joke at this point to say that some are born to achieve greatness, while sometimes greatness is simply trust unto others. Just to say that it seemed destiny that 40k will find me. But nah, I'm just a fun Italian man hyperfixated with the lore of a tabletop war game. But it is a tabletop war game for which I learned English. I didn't speak much of it when I discovered 40k. Not enough to learn the lore from the sources at least. I learned English in 6 months between bus trips just for 40k. For the hobby that was my light in the darkness. For the hobby that stopped my depression from pulling me over the edge. For the universe that fascinated me so much that it has led me here. This is why I can't stop caring. This is why I love the hobby so much. This is why I want to see 40k do well, keep evolving to be a better and cohesive story, and not be polluted by politics that will be dated in a few years, just because a bunch of people that don't care, and you have seen from the screens that they don't care, screech that they are offended by this and that. The normal answer should be, who cares, get the fuck out of my hobby and find another. But instead, if we don't speak up, Games Workshop really risks bending the knee even more than they already did. Don't believe I like this situation, I despise it completely. 40k has been tainted by a war of ideology in the middle of which I found myself without really wanting any part in it. I wanted to enjoy 40k, read 40k, learn 40k, and occasionally lore down people with so much lore they will beg me to stop. But like Horus said,
So let it be war.
40k was there for me when I had nothing else in life that gave me happiness or something to look at in wonder. It is why I want the best for it, and why I took a stance against everyone, unknown or famous, that decides to try and ruin my hobby for any reason. Allowing female Space Marines in 40k does nothing else than gut one of the fundamental rules of the universe of 40k. The rule that says that Marines can only be male, and if that rule is removed from the equation, who knows what else will follow. Until the universe is nothing but grey slop, as generic and boring as possible. Don't believe me? Compare D&D lore from the first 3 editions to now. Look how much the lore has been annihilated, just because random people were offended at random stuff nobody ever cared about until somebody was offended by it. Female Space Marines will be the destruction of 40k, because they will be just the beginning.
But why can't your hobby become more inclusive to accommodate us?
Because Warhammer 40,000 is already as inclusive as it can naturally get. Anything more and it will inevitably feel forced. If anything, you should be complaining about female locked factions, as with the Custodians becoming mixed, there is 2 female-only factions, in spite of only 1 male exclusive one. Where is your equality in that?
But if you change it in this very long list of ways for us, we might start to like it and enjoy it.
True fans enter the hobby with wonder and curiosity. They are always well accepted, especially by gatekeepers. Whoever enters the hobby just to ask for changes in it are not true fans, and will never be. Find another hobby you will enjoy. Don't come ruin mine.
Who are you to decide who is a true fan or not? I'm a fan as much as you are.
You were never one of us. You and your ilk are nothing but usurpers led by false idols on the internet. I have opened my eyes to this long ago. There is true fans, and there is fans that are more comparable to gene stealers than people. Engaged in an hobby only to turn it in an ideological battlefield, to push their own ideals on people that just want a respite from real-life worries. I have realized long ago that you don't offer anything good to anything you engage with. It is why all properties that try to cater to you flop catastrophically. Your presence genuinely offends me. I am sorry, but I have to do it. Say hi to Jeffrey.
That is all the 4 snaps do?
And to his army of close and distant relatives of the Imperial Guard. Damn it, they destroyed reality as we knew it.
Ah, don't tell me I survived the literal end of the universe just to be stuck to learn 40k lore in the nothingness.
You are sturdier than you appear, Pio. That is for sure.
At least I don't live in a basement anymore.
Oh, look at that. The basement survived too.
Fuck!
I'm tired, Pio. Let's go home. Please press the reset reality button behind you.
Alright, but I want a pizza for all of this. Without pineapple.